Hi, Julie here with Paisleys and Polka Dots. Today I'm going to show you a hopefully short tutorial on how I put together one of our wood projects. I've been doing the wood projects for about 2 years now and never have done a video on how I put them together. And I thought maybe some of you might have some questions about the types of products that I use or some of the tips and techniques to putting one of these projects together. So just thought it might help some of you out there. So let's get started. As far as the products I use, here is the wood glue. I use Doris wood glue. Any type of wood glue will work though. I haven't found a brand that I don't like. The only particular product that I don't like is Mod Podge, and I have had some of you ask me about Mod Podge. It tends to make the paper too moist, and then my paper wrinkles and bubbles. So I'm not a fan of it. But whatever products I am suggesting are just the products that I like to use. That doesn't mean that that's what you have to use. If you have a product that you like to use, by all means go ahead and use that and what works for you. The other type of glue I like to use is the Aleene's Tacky Glue. I've also used the Crafter's Pick Ultimate. It's thick, so I like it to glue these little tinier pieces down to my base piece, and it tends to hold them in place nicely while they are drying because it's so thick. Ink. This is my Tim Holtz Walnut Stain ink. I love this ink. I use it on all of my projects. This pad is years old. As you can see, my inking tool is years old and well worn. And I love this color. It's my go-to color, but any kind of brown ink, distressing ink that you have on hand or a favorite color will work for your project. And inking is optional. You don't have to do that step. It's a matter of preference whether you like that look or not. The one step I don't recommend you skip is the sanding or the sanding, which you use an emery board or nail file for, which I just get at the beauty shop. I can use one of these things for 6 months or more. They are really sturdy. They last a long time. I like it better than a sanding block or a piece of sandpaper because it's stiff, so it gives you some leverage while you're sanding your piece. So these I definitely love. Paint brushes. You can use the foam brush, but I think it tends to soak up your paint a little bit more than a regular brush. This is my go-to brush, and I like it because it feels like the perfect size for me. I also use it to put my wood glue on as well. If I have little tight spaces, I'll use this brush. But these foam brushes, they do work. They're not a problem at all, and they're great to just toss away when you're done. I do recommend a pencil, but a mechanical pencil for tracing your wood pieces onto your paper. And the reason I like the mechanical pencil is because for getting in these little tight spaces down here, you really can't get a pencil down in there. So if you poke out your lead really far, you can then lightly trace down in these little grooves and crevices. Yes, I do break the lead quite often, and I just push out a little bit more lead. So that works great for that. Paint. This is the paint I use. Any acrylic paint will work. I get it at Hobby Lobby or Michael's. I don't particularly stick with any one brand. I have Anita's Craft Smart, which I think is the Michael's brand, the Americana and the Delta. I basically take my paper to the store and match whatever color paint works. So even if I'm working at home and I don't have a color, sometimes I'll even mix colors together to get the right color because I don't want to go out. So I have suggested colors on all of the instructions, but if you can't find those colors at your local craft store, then by all means take your paper to the store with you and match the color of the paper to the bottle of paint. That's what I do, and is what works best. Okay, so that's it on the products, and next we're going to get started on our tracing. So when I first start a project, the first thing I want to do is I tend to lay out all of the little wood pieces on to the wood. I layer them all up because this project here is a perfect example that you can get something wrong or backwards or not quite in the right spot. Because like these, if you look at the instructions, if you look at the picture here, these go upwards, but they definitely fit if you're to place them this way as well. So they're not quite right. So it really helps to look at the picture and then also lay all of these pieces out before you start tracing all of your pattern paper. Otherwise, you might get something traced wrong, okay? So I like to lay out all of my little wood pieces on to the wood first. The next step is to place your wood pieces front side up. So put your paper down, face up, then put the wood on your paper, face up, okay? So this is the front side, okay? I'm gonna remove these off here and put them to the side. Now this particular piece, you also have to be careful that you're not gonna cover this piece of wood because this piece is going to overlap it. So this is the piece that you're gonna want to cover, not the base piece. So when I trace this piece of wood, I'm only going to be tracing this lower half of his body. And this is that little area where I want to poke my lead all the way out and kind of lightly trace in this area. And then I put my lead back in so I won't break it once I get to these other sections. Okay, so I trace all the way around the body here. Okay. And then I take my other face piece and lay it on the top here, which you could have just traced around the whole head, but then I don't have this section right here to follow a line to trace it nicely. Okay, so I'm going to lay this on here, and it's pretty tight, so put it way up at the top there, and I'm going to trace around this piece as well. Okay, also on some of your papers, you might find like these here on the instructions, it shows the pattern on this side, but these little pieces up here, that is the print on the back. So you want to be aware of the prints that are shown. So it might be on the back side of the paper. So what I'll do is I will lay out all of the paper pieces for this print onto this piece of pattern paper and draw these all out. And then once I have these drawn out, then I'll flip my paper over and then trace the two little earpieces on the back side. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and finish tracing all of my paper pieces, and I'll be back. Now that I have all of my paper pieces all traced, my little eyes and nose here, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to cut around on just on the pencil line or just in from the pencil line. I mean, just in, like, and that is why you want to sand. Sometimes you might not quite get on the pencil line just the way you want. So the sanding works good for this problem. So I'm going to cut all this out, and I stopped from going the other direction there because I wanted to cut out the face first so that I have that rounded section, okay? And because you sand, I mean, you want to be precise, but if it's a little off here or there, it's not a problem. Like I said, sanding kind of makes any kind of little imperfections perfect. So. I think you might be able to hear my dog in the background there moaning and groaning. He's not getting any attention. So, okay. So I'm going to go ahead and keep cutting. And as soon as I'm finished, because you don't need to sit and watch me do this, and I'll be right back. Now that I have all of my paper pieces cut, I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to set them aside, because now we are going to start painting our wood pieces. So we don't need these in the way. One thing I do want to mention about cutting is if you're worried about cutting not in the right spot, I would recommend the best way to cut is directly on, try to cut on that pencil line if you want to be precise as possible and not kind of mess up. So when it comes to the painting, I've poured some paint out here on a piece of chipboard. You can use a paper plate, whatever. I do like to wet my brush. I have a little bucket over here of water, but I do like to moisten my paintbrush and get all the water out of it so that it kind of keeps all the bristles together. So we're going to start by painting the sides of the wood. Sometimes I'll paint the sides of these, but since it's already black, a lot of times I don't. But because I think on this one, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to paint the sides, so it'll be a continuous gray on the side here. Probably all these little pieces, I'm not going to paint the sides on, but it's completely up to you. I will paint the little nose piece here. I'm going to paint that black. So when I paint, I just put a little bit of paint, and my paint is actually drying up a little bit. So you're going to want, I paint sideways, and I just put a little bit on my brush, kind of like that, and I'll paint both directions. And a little bit will get on the front of the wood, like this, and then I'll take my brush and kind of, you know, get it off. So, because you don't want a bunch of clumps on your wood. But you don't have to be too precise with it. Go ahead and just slap on the paint as you go around. And if your paint does tend to dry out and get little clumps in it, I just kind of pick them out. I tend to make my paints go as far as I can make them go, so if there's a few little clumps in there, that doesn't bother me. And I'll usually do at least 2 coats. I think the MDF wood kind of does tend to soak up the paint a little bit. So I'll usually put on 2 coats. And I do tend to get the little bit of the edges right here on the front, because if my paper doesn't match up exactly, then I do have that gray coverage that helps it not show as much. Hope that makes sense. Because these are pieces that are all hand cut, so there is possibly a little bit of room for that human error of the cutting, because they are cut on a scroll saw by hand. But see how I could just kind of shove my brush in there, get it down in the crevices. I hope you can see that, you know, way down in there. And work my way around. I do paint the backside a solid color. Sometimes you might have 2 pieces, like the top half of him might have been, say like, you might have half the top part a different pattern and the lower part of him a different print. So in that case, if you have 2 different colors, say the top part was black and the bottom part was gray, then I would just kind of make a line across where those 2 divide each other, and I would just make a straight line across and paint the upper part one color and the bottom part another color. And usually by the time I get to the other pieces and I've painted the other pieces, I've pretty much, this one is done. It's dried, so I can go ahead and put on my second coat. And I'll usually do around all the outside edge, kind of working in, you know, a little bit of one direction here. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to move on to this piece just for tutorial purposes, and then I'll stop the video and finish the rest of that. But I do go ahead and, like I said, I paint the back a solid color, but these little pieces, I do it the same way. I just brush on the corner edges, and any or paint that, see, I don't know, can you see the little globs of paint there? I'll just brush those so they're nice and flat, because I don't want little globs of paint on the side of my, on the front of my wood here. And of course you don't have to paint the back side of this because it's going to get glued to the base piece. So you don't need to. I just pretty much pay attention. But when you're painting one direction, then you're only getting paint, extra paint, I should say, on one side. If you go back and forth, then you're going to get paint on the back side of your wood too. So it's a good rule of thumb to always just kind of paint in one direction. I guess I got all my painting skills years ago when I used to toll paint. Maybe some of you remember those days. I guess I'm kind of dating myself now. I better be quiet, huh? So, okay, so I went around that one really quickly, but I also do 2 coats on this, especially with the black. Sometimes it's a little bit harder to cover. So I'm going to set that aside, and I'm going to go back to this one. And when I get all my pieces painted, I shall return. Okay, I am all done painting my sides. This is what the fronts look like, you know, not too precise. The back, see, I didn't, because I painted going one direction, there's nothing on the back sides. This is the back side. I just put a quick coat of gray on the back. I only put 1 coat, but if you have it in a place where it's showing, you might want to put on 2. I did want to show you, though, how, you know, I do use this little tiny brush to paint these little pieces, and it works out really, really well. It does help that I have no fingernails, like the long pretty ones like most of you have out there. I can't work, I don't know how you do it. I can't have fingernails, although I miss them because they always look so pretty. But I don't, because I have to hold on to these little tiny pieces all the time, and it drives me nuts to try to hold on to them with my fingernails. But after you get, so that's that. I got it all painted, my little nose. After you're done with all of your painting, I highly recommend that you go and wash your hands for any paint that you have on them for the next step. And I usually do keep a moist towel with me for this next step with the glue, because you don't, one of the most important things with this is you don't want to get any glue on the front side of your paper, because it will show. And if you do, I have taken a very moist paper towel and quickly just gently wiped over the top, and I have gotten the glue off. So I've poured some glue out here. I'm going to put this one on. I'm going to set this little guy aside. So this is what he kind of looks like on the sides too. So he's all painted. Back side is painted. This is what the front looks like. So it's not so pretty on the front, but that doesn't matter because we're going to cover it up, right? So when I start to paint with the glue, I pour some out on my little chipboard piece here, or paper plate, or whatever you have, and get a little bit of glue onto the paintbrush. Excuse me. And I brush from the center outward. Okay. And it's very thin coat. And you want to work quickly, but not too quickly, because the glue does tend to dry a little fast. But I'm always working from the center outward so that I don't get glue on the sides of my wood. Because that, if I get glue on the sides of my wood, that's when I tend to get it on the front when I go to put my paper on my wood piece. So I'm painting around all the outsides, trying to hang on to it, not get glue on my fingers. And that's why I do kind of have a wet paper towel or a wet rag sitting next to me so that I can wipe off my fingers quickly before I go to put the paper onto the wood. So now I've gone around all my outside edges, except for right here. I've missed a spot. Okay, and I kind of hold it like this so that I can go all the way around. Okay, so once I get all the glue, and you can see that it balls up on the edges a little bit, I just kind of go over those. Okay, and then I start filling in the center. Like I said, I try to work quickly, but okay. And then turn it around and set it down. And like I said, I do have my little paper or towel here. You're gonna set it on top of your wood, nice and evenly, okay? And I try to move it around, get it all nice and like I said, I washed my hands after I quit painting, and I tend to push down on all my outside edges. So I'll go around all the outside edges because for some reason, I don't know why, but the edges tend to lift when you stick them on the glue. So I will go and I'll push with my finger. I'll rub my finger all the way around the outside edges because you don't want your paper to lift and when you're sanding. And then I'll just rub. So this is why you want nothing on your fingertips. And like I said, I have, I've gotten a little bit of glue on the front, and I'll just take my damp little towel and I'll wipe it real quickly. And it hasn't ruined my project. So, and if you do get a little glue on it, which I have definitely done that and it hasn't come off, it's either going to get covered up or by the time you're done, you hardly notice it. Okay. So that is how I do that. Even on the smaller pieces. I'm going to take this one, and you can use a smaller brush, but I still use my big brush, and I kind of go around, hold it. Like I said, this is why I don't have nice pretty fingernails, because these little pieces are just too hard to hold. So, okay, get some glue all over that. Place it down on my table. Put that over the top. And sometimes with these little pieces, make sure there's nothing on your tabletop. And I'll turn it over and I'll push it down really, really hard to get that paper to really get secure on there. And once in a while, your glue will squeeze out the edges if you have a little too much glue on there. That's why I like to paint my glue on. And then, you can feel as you go around it, you'll feel that you get some glue on your fingertips. That's when you want to stop and have that little paper towel or cloth and wipe them off, because you definitely don't want to have anything on the front of your paper. Okay, so there's that little piece. All right. And like I said, I didn't do the sides of the wood because I like to distress my wood. So by the time I sand everything off and I distress it, the sides really blend together with the sides of that dark black part. So I kind of like that look, so I leave it like that. Okay, now I'm going to do this piece, and he doesn't meet up. So sometimes what I'll do is I'll actually trace this, because I've gone over a little bit when I cut. I left that little bit of overage because I wanted this piece to overlap it just a little bit so you wouldn't see any line. So what you can do is you can take your pencil and trace like this. And that way you know where the glue's going to go on your piece. That, or I'll show you another thing that I always do. I'll get close to that line. I said go around the outside edge, always painting toward, see I got a little glue on the outside right there. So I'm going to wipe that off real quick because I don't want any glue on the sides. So this is the part that's probably the most tedious, is trying to paint the glue on and not get glue everywhere. And that's probably why I like this type of paintbrush too, because I have better control over my glue on my wood. Okay. So as you can see, I'm just working from the center outward, because if I was to go this way, I'd be getting glue all over the sides here. And I don't want that. Okay, so I'm going to get close to my pencil line up at the top. I'm going to go kind of sideways here. I'm going to make sure I paint in the center here. And then to make sure that, one of the other things you can do to make sure that you're going to really have that top stuck down is then you can go onto your paper piece. I flip it over and I just give a little bit of paint on that top edge. Okay, so now I'm going to put this one on. Put it all down, line it all up. And I said, I tend to go around these edges like a couple times, just kind of pressing them down and getting them nice and tight. And yes, like right here, I can see where my paper's overlapping the wood. But that's okay, because we're going to sand. And that's where I say that when you sand, it kind of like welds the paper into the wood, and they kind of like look like they become one. So it's really an important step, and I recommend highly that you don't skip that next step. But you do want to let all your paper pieces dry. But by the time I get from these two and the little, what's this? That's the nose piece. By the time I get everything done, all of the pieces will, the first pieces will be dry enough to start sanding. So that's how you do those portions. I'm going to go ahead and finish all of my paper pieces, and then I'll be back with the next step. So I now have all of my pieces, wood, the paper pieces attached to my wood pieces. And you can see how some of these, like this little piece right here, I think you might be able to tell how it's overlapping the wood. So those kind of things we are not going to worry about, because we are going to sand them off. So, and even the little nose, because it's painted solid and everything is going to be sanded and kind of distressed looking, I do keep a little piece of real small piece of sandpaper, and sometimes I will even take and just sand a little bit of the edge off. But with this little nose, you have to be very careful, because it's quite delicate. But I'll just give the little nose a little bit of sanding there. So to do the main ones, normally this is going to kind of be difficult for me, because I like to sit it in my lap, and I always like to work in a downward motion. Okay, so I'm going to move this out of the way for now. So I hold my file like this, and I'll just start working downward. And I am using actually the heavier side of the nail file. Let me see if I can find a spot where, see how you can kind of see how it starts taking away see, I mean, there's a whole row right here of paper that's going to come off. You can kind of see how that paper is lifting there. Okay, and we want to sand all of that off, always in a downward motion, because if I sand it both ways, I might lift some of the paper. So I always sand downward like this and away from me. But I'm not being too delicate. I'm really getting in there and getting that paper off the side of that wood. And it does kind of leave a little bit of some of the raw edge again, but I don't mind that. It's just part of the look. But it does, like I say, it kind of welds that paper into that wood, so that, but can you see the long little strings that are coming off here? A lot of times I'll even put my trash can next to me, because this kind of makes a little bit of a mess, I would say. So I'll actually sand all these little paper piece things into my trash can. And when you get into the corner, see, I just kind of just get into those little crevices, even with still this nail file. I can still get in there kind of at an angle, and always still working downward and working around my wood piece. Okay. So that's what the sides look like. And this is what the front looks like. Maybe you can see that. Hopefully you can see that. Okay. So you can leave it like this, just the little distressed edge like that. Or you can distress it with your ink and give it a little bit of a darker edge. So we're going to just kind of brush this off into the kind of the trash can / floor at the moment. Okay. And then we're going to go on to this piece where I'm going to work my way around. See how it's coming off there? And I'm still working in that corner. I can still get into the corners with my file. Even this little tiny corner here, I can still get into there. Just working, putting it kind of into that little crevice and filing it downward. I can work my way into those little corners. So this really does do a pretty good job at that. Getting into all the little nooks and crannies. But by the time I get to this point, I'm not going to be able to get this file in there. And even like this one, it's such a tight corner that so that one I might have to work at getting that paper off of there. And sometimes I'll even push this way away from me. But again, I'm still working away and always going away from the wood, not back up this direction, so that I'm going to possibly lift the paper. I don't want to do that. So I'm just still kind of pushing the nail file down away from me. Okay, so I can go in little tiny strokes there. I can even get it in here a little bit. So this is kind of the tedious part. And sometimes, you know, if I miss a little spot or it's just not perfect, I'm okay with that, you know. Let's see, let me get my other nail file here. So this is where I start with the other nail files. I like these flat ones. And I just start going along the edge with the nail file, getting into the nooks and crannies. And still working away from me, still pushing the nail file away. And just keep working it till you see the paper come off. Okay, and then see that little, go back to this one, kind of get in there with a, kind of blow all your little paper pieces out of there. Okay, and that's how that works, getting all the little, getting in those nooks and crannies like that. Okay, and then for the little pieces, you can still even use this big nail file. It works really well for getting off even the smallest, on the smallest pieces. And again, I'm not being too gentle. I'm just really kind of sanding away at that, at those sides. And while you're working kind of with your paint and your glue and everything, you do want to kind of protect your work surface, which I'm sure all of you know. I just covered my desk here with paper because my office has glass tables that I work from, and it was reflecting from the video here. But I like working on my glass top tables because they, you know, get out some Windex and they clean up really nicely. So working on a glass top table is perfect for me, since I'm always designing and doing these projects. So I have a very messy tabletop. One of these days, I guess I'll have to show you my office, but it always looks like a bomb went off in it, so you probably don't want to see it. Okay, so see, Even these little pieces, they sand up pretty quickly, pretty easily. And I'm almost completely finished sanding all of the pieces for the fox. Or it's not the fox, it's the raccoon. We do have a little, his little friend is the fox that we have. Okay, so I'm going to finish the rest of these, and then I will be back to show you how to distress them. Okay, I have all of my pieces sanded, and this is what they look like. So you can put your piece together, you know, glue it all together at this point, or you can add your distressing ink. So my pad here, like I said, is very old. My tool is very old, so it's kind of dried out, so it makes it really easy for me to have a very light hand. But basically I just put a little ink on the pad and I lightly brush around the edges. It helps that my pad is worn and old and kind of dried out, because then the inking isn't too heavy on my piece. So I just work my way around, just brushing the edges. And I don't worry so much about getting in every little nook and cranny, because overall it's just supposed to be a little bit of distressing. But I do still tend to work away from me. I brush away. And you don't want to have your tool this way. You want to have your tool on the edge. Otherwise, you're going to have this edge get onto your paper, which you don't want this line running across your paper. So you always do want to hold your tool down at an angle working around. But when I get to here, you know, I'm in these little nooks and crannies, so I'm just kind of barely dabbing a little bit of my sponge onto the corners. Okay, even on this one, you know, you just brush on some ink as heavy as you want it or as light as you want it. The white, of course, it's going to show up more. So I'm just lightly brushing, again, holding my tool at this angle, not this way, and working my way around the little edges. And I do have a very light hand when I do this. I'm barely brushing it on. You can even do it on the black part. It kind of darkens the edge. You might not be able to see that on the video, but I can see it here in person. And I just go around all of the pieces, giving, you know, darkening up the edge. On these darker ones, I do push a little bit harder, only because it's a dark piece and you don't see it quite as much because it's dark. So I might be pressing a little bit harder on this one. But on the lighter color pieces, you definitely want to have a light touch when you're going around these ones. And I just work my way around. Always, again, working away from you, not towards you. Always pushing away. You have more control that way. Oh, I've already done this one. See how quickly that was just to go around all these little pieces? Took me no time at all. So now we're going to go ahead and we're going to start gluing the pieces together. And this is where I use my the tacky glue, Dalene's tacky glue, or the Crafter's Pick Ultimate. Okay, so I'm going to want to start by gluing down this piece first. So here's my tacky glue, and basically I'll just put some glue on the back side. I stay away from all of my edges, but I do give it a good, kind of like that. Okay. And press it down real good. Okay. And line it all up with your top piece. And like I said, sometimes it doesn't line up exact because of that human error of cutting the base, because these pieces, these thin pieces, are all cut on a laser, and then the base piece is all cut by hand. So, but it's just part of the character. It gives it a little bit of a gray frame if you have a little bit of spacing around it, and that's why I do paint the little bit of edges all the way around so that that gets covered. Okay, and then again, you want to make sure that your pieces are going the way they're supposed to be going. Okay, so these two get put like that. Okay, so again, put some glue on here, kind of like that. and glue them down. And like I said, I like this glue because it's kind of thick and it just kind of holds them in place, and it doesn't tend to, you know, once you push your piece, and I'm pushing them on pretty good. You know, I want that glue to squish out and go to the sides. Okay. And if anything moves, you can line it back up. As it starts to dry, you can make sure that everything is still aligned. But you don't want to put too much glue on that it's going to squeeze out the sides. Another thing that's nice about the Aleene's is it does dry clear. So that's also a little bit of a nice point, that once it's dry, if anything does kind of squeeze out, it's not really going to show. So that's a good thing. Okay, like this, I think I got a little bit of squish out of some glue right there, but it's not going to matter once it's dry. Okay, here's the little other eye. Here's the little nose. And like I said, this little nose you've got to be pretty careful with, because it's quite delicate. Okay, it does kind of go to the top up here. Let me see. And if you get any glue underneath, you can just kind of wipe it off a little bit. Like I said, it doesn't really show when it's dry. Get his little tail pieces on here. So I have my tail pieces on, and I'm just going to finish up here with the little ear pieces. Okay. Oh, and I did, before I started gluing everything together, I did go ahead and take this twine that comes in the kit, and I put it through the little buttons and just tied a knot on to the back side of the button. So I'm going to go ahead and glue these buttons on to the center of the white parts of the eyes here with the glue. Okay. And I tend to keep my little buttons not directly in the very center of the whites of his eyes, only because then, I don't know, I think they just kind of look kind of polka dot-ish if that's the case. So I tend to move them toward the center a little bit. So and there you have it. And he's all finished. So let's see. Can you see? Can you see the inking and all of the details of him? So really simple project. It's not difficult to do. Not very time consuming. You can do a project in a few hours with all the techniques. And so I hope you enjoyed the tutorial, and I hope it maybe helped and answered a few questions if you had any. So thank you for watching.